Hale was the kind of woman who seemed to blend into the background of small-town America. People called her, and the name fit her, soft, warm, familiar. At 76 years old, she lived in a modest brick house on the edge of a quiet Virginia town. The paint was chipped in places, the flower beds carefully tended, and the American flag at the porch was always kept clean. Neighbors knew her as the retired schoolteacher who spent summers in her garden and winters knitting by the fireplace. To the children who grew up under her watch, she was a patient, almost grandmotherly figure who taught fractions with chalk dust on her hands. To parents, she was the steady presence at school plays, science fairs, and graduation ceremonies. When her name came up at the grocery store or in church, it was said with mild affection, "Oh yes, Miss Hale, the teacher. Sweet woman." Nothing about her life seemed extraordinary. Kept her routines predictable. Every Tuesday, she walked to the library to borrow 2 books, usually a history or science volume for herself, and a mystery novel for her grandson to read aloud when he visited. On Sundays, she sat in the second pew from the back at church, never drawing attention to herself but never absent either. She lived alone, her husband having passed years before and her son busy with work overseas. Her grandson, Alex, often visited after school. He was 12, a wiry boy with a fascination for airplanes. He plastered posters of jets on her refrigerator, left toy models on her kitchen table, and begged her to take him to every within driving distance. Indulged him, smiling at his excitement, though she rarely spoke about aircraft herself. To him, she was just Grandma, the woman who baked him cookies, reminded him to do his homework, and let him stay up late to watch documentaries about fighter jets. But beneath the gentle rhythms of her quiet life, there was a silence carried that few could detect. When conversations drifted to war stories or military service, she always listened politely but never contributed. When Alex asked if anyone in their family had ever worked with planes, she brushed the question aside with vague answers. "Oh, I knew a few people who did," or "That was such a long time ago, sweetheart." He didn't press. After all, what could his grandmother possibly know about F-22 Raptors or stealth fighters? The truth was hidden so deeply that even sometimes wondered if her younger years had been real, or if they had just been a dream locked away in classified files. For decades, she had buried her past beneath the ordinary roles of wife, mother, and teacher. It wasn't shame that kept her silent. It was the secrecy of programs never meant to be spoken about in public, and a quiet humility that told her the past belonged to history, not to her. But history has a way of finding people. On a warm spring afternoon, agreed to take Alex to a local. He had been buzzing with excitement for weeks, waving flyers at her and begging her not to forget. "They'll have Raptors, Grandma, real F-22 Raptors, the most advanced jets in the world," she chuckled, brushing a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "If you say so, Alex, we'll go." When they arrived, was like any other spectator in the crowd. Families spread picnic blankets on the grass, children waved miniature American flags, and the smell of popcorn mixed with jet fuel filled the air. Alex ran ahead, darting from one aircraft display to another, while followed at a slower pace, enjoying the sunshine and the laughter around her. She could hear the roar of engines overhead, but she did not flinch the way some did. At one point, the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "Ladies, and before the next demonstration, we'll be pulling a raffle ticket for a ride in one of our vintage trainers. And the winner is," he paused, drawing suspense, "Hale." Smiled faintly as her grandson's jaw dropped. "Grandma, that's you." He grabbed her hand, tugging her forward. People clapped politely, turning to look at the white-haired woman in her cardigan. To them, it was a sweet, unexpected moment. But not everyone in the crowd was smiling casually. Among the pilots standing near the announcer's booth were several men in crisp flight suits, patches of the F-22 squadron glinting under the sun. At the sound of her name, they froze. One pilot blinked hard, as if unsure he had heard correctly. Another leaned closer, whispering quickly, "Did he just say Hale? Hale?" Their posture shifted, shoulders squared, eyes narrowed. The easy, casual stance of young aviators gave way to something sharper, something respectful, almost reverent. The crowd didn't notice at first, but Alex did. He tugged his grandmother's hand again, whispering, "Grandma, why are they looking at you like that?" Simply smiled, her eyes soft but unreadable. The truth, long hidden, was about to step out of the shadows. Long before she was a grandmother standing in the bleachers of a Virginia, Hale was a young woman walking nervously through the gates of Edwards Air Force Base. It was 1963, the height of the Cold War. America was locked in a race not only against the Soviet Union but against time itself. The military demanded innovation, and the skis had become the new battlefield. Fighter jets were evolving rapidly, faster, higher, more advanced than ever before, but with that speed came deadly risks. Test flights ended in crashes, brilliant engineers saw their designs fail in flames, and pilots were lost almost weekly. The Air Force needed fresh eyes, sharper minds, and new ideas to survive the brutal pace of change. That was where came in. She wasn't a pilot, at least, not officially. She had graduated from college with a degree in mathematics and physics, a rare path for women at the time. When she applied for a civilian analyst role with the Air Force, she expected to be shoved behind a desk, working endless calculations for others to interpret. But her quiet confidence and sharp insights quickly drew attention. Within months, she was invited into a highly classified program that didn't exist on paper. The group was tasked with developing emergency response protocols for high-speed jet failures, catastrophic situations no one had solutions for. The Air Force needed simulations, decision trees, and test scenarios. And while most of the group was made up of decorated male pilots, engineers, and officers, was different. An outsider, a civilian, and a woman. Most thought she wouldn't last a week. They were wrong. In a cramped simulation chamber quickly proved her worth. Where others panicked during mock engine fires or hydraulic failures, she stayed calm, analyzing conditions step by step. She wasn't flying the plane herself, but she was guiding the simulated pilot's decisions, her voice steady, her reasoning precise. "You have 90 seconds before full systems collapse," she'd say. "Cut fuel to the left engine, reroute hydraulics, stabilize roll with trim, now breathe. You still have altitude." The military men in the room would exchange glances. She was doing what half of them couldn't, staying rational when simulated death loomed large on the instruments. By the end of her first month, whispers had already spread across the base. The woman doesn't break. But's rise wasn't easy. She faced skepticism, even ridicule. Some pilots dismissed her ideas as theoretical nonsense. Others openly scoffed at taking instructions from a civilian woman. Yet when her models worked, when her decision kept simulated jets alive where human instincts failed, the resistance began to crumble. There was one incident early on that cemented her reputation. A decorated test pilot had been running a simulator when the system mimicked a total electrical failure at high altitude. The pilot froze. His breathing spiked. His hands gripped the controls, but he couldn't decide what to do. Seconds ticked away. In the observation booth, engineers muttered anxiously, then leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Reset your emergency battery. You've still got backup control surfaces. Drop altitude gradually, don't fight the descent." The pilot followed her commands mechanically. To everyone's surprise, the simulator stabilized. He landed virtually intact. When he climbed out of the cockpit, pale and shaken, he stared at. "I thought I was dead," he muttered. "You weren't," she replied simply. From that day on, some began to take her seriously. Still, her contributions remained hidden. Classified reports listed program-developed procedures instead of naming the mind who created them. When officers presented her models to higher command, they scrubbed her name from the margins. The culture of the era couldn't imagine crediting a young woman with saving the lives of elite fighter pilots, so she accepted the erasure quietly, focusing on the work. She never bragged, never complained, never told her family what she was doing. To the world outside Edwards, she was just another civilian working in research. But inside those secret walls, Hale was becoming something else entirely. The ghostly architect of survival strategies that would ripple through aviation for decades. And though history chose to forget her name, the men she saved never did. They carried whispers of her in flight halls, in classified briefings, in late-night conversations when adrenaline still pumped through their veins. "There's a woman who can outthink death itself," they said. Never knew it at the time, but those whispers would one day reach the ears of pilots flying machines she couldn't have even dreamed of, sleek, invisible jets called Raptors. And when those pilots finally heard her name, their reaction would be nothing short of reverence. For now, though, she remained hidden, a secret, a phantom teacher behind the glass. The morning sun glared against polished canopies as the crowd gathered near the runway. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders, families spread out on folding chairs, and the smell of hot dogs mixed with jet fuel in the crisp Virginia air. Alex darted through the crowd, tugging at his grandmother's hand, his voice high with excitement. "Come on, Grandma, we'll miss the Raptors," chuckled, adjusting the brim of her wide. At her age, she no longer rushed for anything, but Alex's energy was infectious. She allowed herself to be pulled toward the main stage, where announcers hyped the upcoming demonstrations. At that moment, the loudspeakers crackled. "Ladies, and before our next flight demonstration, we'll draw a raffle ticket for a ride in a vintage trainer aircraft." The announcer's voice carried across the field, playful and teasing. The crowd quieted as he rustled the ticket bucket theatrically. Then, with a grin, he announced, "And the winner is Hale." Applause broke out. Alex's mouth dropped open. "That's you, Grandma, that's you." He bounced on his toes, thrilled beyond belief. "You're going to fly in one of the planes." Blinked, amused and slightly embarrassed. She gave a polite smile, lifting her hand to wave as people turned to look. Most clapped warmly, charmed at the idea of a grandmother winning such a prize. To them it was sweet, perhaps even comic. But the pilots standing nearby didn't smile. A group of F-22 Raptor pilots in pressed flight suits, chatting casually near the announcer's booth, froze when the name echoed over the speakers. One of them, a captain with a square jaw and sunburned cheeks, turned sharply toward the announcer as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Did he say Hale?" he muttered. Another pilot's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, Hale, did you catch that first name?" The easy conversation between them evaporated. Their bodies stiffened, posture sharpening as though they had been summoned to inspection. The captain repeated the name slowly, reverently. "Hale." The crowd continued cheering, oblivious, but something had shifted. Alex noticed it first. His eyes darted to the pilots, then back to his grandmother. "Grandma, why are they looking at you like that?" Indeed, the young men in flight suits were staring at her, not with casual curiosity, but with recognition. One of them whispered something to another, and saw the shock ripple across their faces. The kind of shock that comes not from surprise, but from encountering a legend you'd only heard about in stories. She felt Alex's small hand tighten around hers. "Grandma." Offered him a calm smile, though inside, a ripple of unease moved through her. She had lived her life in deliberate obscurity, never once imagining her name would trigger a reaction like this. Not here, not now. The announcer beckoned her forward toward the raffle stage. Slowly walked, Alex trotting beside her. The applause faded into whispers as the Raptor's pilots straightened to full attention, eyes fixed on her. She could feel their gaze, respectful, questioning, almost reverent. The crowd began to notice. A murmur rippled through the spectators as people turned to look, not at the raffle winner, but at the unusual behavior of the Air Force's finest. The captain stepped forward, unable to restrain himself. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice low enough for only her and Alex to hear, "are you Hale, Edwards Air Force Base, Emergency Response Program?" Froze mid-step. Her grandson looked up, confused. "Grandma, what is he talking about?" The other pilots leaned closer, waiting for her answer. They looked as though they'd stumbled across a living ghost. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, but her eyes carried a weight Alex had never seen before. "That was a long time ago," she murmured. The captain blinked, then straightened as if confirming a secret only whispered in archives. He said over his shoulder, his voice breaking with awe, "This is her." The other Raptors snapped to attention without hesitation. Their boots clicked against the pavement, their chests lifted, and in unison they saluted. Gasps rose from the crowd. Why would America's most elite pilots, men who flew the most advanced fighters in the world, salute an elderly woman in a cardigan clutching her grandson's hand? Alex's heart raced as he looked up at his grandmother. He had begged her to come see the Raptors, and now the Raptors were standing at attention for her. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. "Who is she? Why are they saluting her?" Said nothing. She simply inclined her head politely toward the young men who treated her like a general. For years she had hidden behind silence, but silence was no longer possible. The past was reaching for her in the open air, with a roar of jets overhead and the eyes of thousands upon her. And Alex, wide-eyed and trembling with pride, realized for the first time that his grandmother was not the woman he thought he knew. The crowd had fallen into an uneasy hush. The applause that followed raffle win faded into whispers as the pilots stood rigid, their salutes cutting through the noise of the festival. Children stopped waving their flags. Parents shaded their eyes, staring at the odd sight. The announcer hesitated, clearly puzzled, but pressed on with a shaky smile. "Well, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a very special guest." His voice cracked as he realized he didn't know why. One of the F-22 pilots stepped forward, a tall lieutenant with sharp features and a voice carrying just enough authority to silence those nearest. He looked directly at, but spoke loud enough for others to hear. "Ma'am, forgive me, but are you the Hale from the Edwards program, Emergency Response Project 1960s?" His eyes flickered. She hadn't heard those words spoken aloud in decades. She gave no answer, only a small, patient smile. Her silence seemed to confirm it. The lieutenant exhaled heavily and turned to his comrades. "This is her. This is the ghost instructor." A ripple of recognition passed through the pilots like a shockwave. They exchanged looks of disbelief, admiration, and almost boyish awe. The crowd gasped. "Ghost instructor, what did that mean?" Alex clutched his grandmother's hand. "Grandma, what's he talking about?" His voice trembled with confusion and excitement. The captain who had first spoken straightened, his eyes locked on. He seemed compelled to explain, not just to Alex but to the world watching. "When we trained for Raptors, we studied emergency protocols. Some of them were unconventional. They weren't written like manuals. They were written like someone was right there talking to you in the cockpit, calm, steady, teaching you not to panic, to think through the chaos. Those procedures kept us alive in simulators that killed everyone else. We were told they came from an early Cold War program, classified origins, and attached to them was only one name, whispered like a rumor: Hale. Hale." His words carried over the crowd. Parents leaned closer. Veterans in the audience sat, their eyes narrowing with recognition of old rumors. Children tugged at sleeves, whispering, "Who is she?" Another pilot stepped in, unable to hold back his excitement. "They told us she wasn't a pilot, that she was a civilian analyst, but she created the response models we still use. Things no computer could think of. When you're spiraling at 30,000 feet and every alarm in the cockpit is screaming at you to eject, it's her voice that's been guiding us to fight for the aircraft instead of abandoning it. She saved lives. Not just back then, she's saving ours now." The pilots nodded, their faces lit with reverence. To them, she wasn't a raffle winner. She was a legend who had shaped their very survival. The crowd stirred, trying to reconcile the frail woman in the cardigan with the secret architect of fighter-pilot training. Some whispered skeptically, others leaned forward with fascination. The announcer lowered his microphone, too stunned to speak. Alex's jaw dropped. He looked at his grandmother as if seeing her for the first time. "Is it true? Grandma, did you really do all that?" Said nothing. Her silence wasn't denial, it was confirmation. Her soft smile held the weight of decades, of secrets carried quietly through ordinary days. The lieutenant shook his head, almost laughing in disbelief. "Ma'am, we always thought you were a myth, a story instructors told us to keep us calm. Remember what Hale taught: breathe, decide, execute. That's what they said. And here you are, standing in front of us." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Someone whispered, "She's the reason they fly the way they do." Another muttered, "How could no one know this?" One by one, the F-22 pilots stepped forward, forming a line before. Their boots clicked against the asphalt as they saluted again, this time slowly, deliberately, the weight of decades in the gesture. The sun gleamed on their mirrored visors as they stood tall before her. America's most advanced warriors honoring a woman the world thought was just a schoolteacher. Alex's eyes filled with tears. He squeezed her hand. "Grandma, you're not ordinary at all, are you?" Finally leaned down, her voice soft but steady. "Ordinary people can still do extraordinary things, Alex. Sometimes, the world just forgets to tell the story." And for the first time, the story was beginning to be told. The year was 1967, and Edwards Air Force Base buzzed with the restless energy of men chasing the future. The Cold War was escalating, the demand for faster and deadlier aircraft growing with each month. In a windowless hangar at the edge of the base sat the program's crown jewel, a massive flight simulator wired with thousands of circuits, switches, and gauges. It was the closest thing to the real cockpit of an experimental fighter, short of actually flying one. Hale sat in the observation booth, clipboard in hand, watching as a young test pilot climbed into the simulator. His jaw was tight, his reputation spotless. He had flown combat missions, earned medals, and boasted that he could handle any emergency. But the program had other ideas. Today's drill would mimic a catastrophic failure, one that no real pilot had yet survived. The room grew still as engineers dimmed the lights. The simulator screens glowed with blue sky. At the signal, the system triggered a failure. Both hydraulic systems cut out at 30,000 feet, leaving the aircraft crippled. Within seconds, the pilot's calm cracked. The stick went slack in his hands. Lights flashed red, alarms screamed. His breathing grew heavy. "I've lost it. No controls, no, damn it, I'm spinning." His voice broke into panic. The simulation showed the jet rolling violently, altitude plummeting. From the observation booth, officers watched grimly. This was the third pilot that week to freeze during this scenario. Each time ended the same, catastrophic crash. Engineers muttered, shaking their heads. If real jets encountered this failure, men would die. The program teetered on the edge of being scrapped entirely. But didn't move. Her eyes locked on the data streams. She wasn't watching the panic, she was listening to the machine. In the chaos, she saw patterns others missed. A faint flicker in the backup power system, a momentary pulse in the control surfaces, tiny openings that the pilot's fear blinded him to. She leaned forward, pressing the intercom. Her voice, calm and clear, cut through the storm. "Listen to me, you still have control. It's limited, but it's there. Reset your emergency battery. That will give you partial hydraulics." The pilot hesitated, sweat pouring down his brow. "Battery reset, that won't." "Do it now," she commanded, steady as steel. His trembling hand flipped the switch. Instantly, the control panel flickered back to life. The left aileron responded sluggishly. "Good," said. "Now ease into a bank, don't fight the spin, work with it, you still have altitude, bleed speed gradually." The simulator groaned as the jet steadied, its wild spin slowing. The nose dipped, but the descent was controlled now. Engineers leaned forward, stunned. No one had managed this before. "Altitude 15,000, the pilot whispered, voice breaking. "I've got it. I've got it back under control. Now guide her down, keep breathing, you're not dead. Stay calm and finish the flight." Silence filled the observation booth as the simulated jet touched virtual tarmac minutes later. The pilot slumped back in his seat, pale and shaken. Slowly, he opened the canopy and stepped out, staring at through the glass wall as if she were a ghost. "You saved me," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Only nodded. "You saved yourself, I just reminded you how." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the senior officer turned to the engineers. "Write this down, every step, every word." And so they did. That single simulation became the cornerstone of modern fighter pilot emergency training. Its calm, logical sequence was transformed into manuals and drills. For decades, pilots would be trained to follow the very steps she had created in that desperate moment. But the glory wasn't hers to keep. The official report credited program-developed procedures. Her name never appeared. The officers, unwilling to credit a young civilian woman with saving the program, quietly erased her from the record. Yet the legend spread anyway. Pilots whispered about the woman who didn't break, the voice that guided them when the cockpit turned into a coffin. They called her the ghost instructor because, though she wasn't in the manuals by name, her presence was felt in every lesson, every simulator, every emergency flight that ended in survival instead of tragedy. That day in 1967, Hale changed the course of aviation, but the world never knew it. Not until decades later, when a raffle ticket at a small town pulled her name back into the light. The grounds had never been so quiet. The roar of the jets, the laughter of families, the constant buzz of vendors, all of it seemed to vanish under the weight of revelation. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on the frail woman standing beside her wide-eyed grandson. The F-22 pilots still stood in their line, saluting as if in formation before a general. Their visors reflected sunlight, but beneath the mirrored glass, their eyes carried reverence and something more, gratitude. The announcer, caught off guard by the gravity of the moment, lowered his microphone. For once, he understood that words would only diminish what was unfolding. Then the lead pilot stepped forward again. He removed his helmet slowly, the hiss of the release cutting through the stillness. His face, young but hardened by years of grueling training, was solemn. He looked straight at. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "on behalf of every pilot who's ever landed a jet safely after a system failure, thank you. We are standing here because of you." The crowd gasped. Some clapped instinctively, but most just stood, frozen, processing what had been said. Shifted slightly, leaning on her cane. She didn't crave applause, didn't need attention. She only offered a soft, tired smile, the same smile that had steadied pilots decades earlier, even when they didn't know her face. Alex tugged her sleeve. His young voice wavered with awe. "Grandma, they're talking about you like you're some kind of superhero." She bent slightly toward him. "Heroes wear uniforms, Alex. I just helped them see what they already had inside." But her modesty didn't stop what happened next. From the side of the stage, a colonel in dress blues emerged, his medals glinting in the sun. The crowd recognized his rank instantly, and whispers rippled through the stands. He approached with measured steps, then stopped and snapped into a crisp salute. The pilot stiffened. The entire field seemed to hold its breath. "Mrs. Hale," the colonel said, his voice deep and formal, "I don't know how this secret stayed buried so long, but I can tell you this. The Air Force owes you a debt beyond measure. Today, in front of everyone here, I want to give you what history failed to." He turned to the pilots, present arms. The sound of boots clicking into position echoed like gunfire. Every F-22 pilot raised their salute again, sharper than before. The colonel joined them, his arm rigid, his gaze unwavering. The crowd couldn't stay silent any longer. Applause erupted, growing louder, rolling like thunder across the field. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders to see. Veterans in the stands rose to their feet, many saluting themselves, tears glistening in their eyes. One old man in a faded flight jacket whispered hoarsely, "I knew it. I heard the stories. She was real." The applause grew until it felt like the entire base might shake. Overwhelmed, pressed a hand to her chest. She had lived her life quietly, content to let others carry the torch. But now the world was shining it back on her, and it felt heavier than she remembered. Alex, beaming, leaned close. "They finally know, Grandma, they finally know." Reporters who had come only to cover the scrambled for cameras and recorders. Within minutes, phones captured the surreal sight. A row of the most advanced fighter pilots in the world saluting a woman who had once been forgotten. The footage spread across social media like wildfire, snippets of phrases shouted by the announcer legend revealed. The ghost instructor, the woman behind the Raptors. But in the center of the storm remained still. She had carried her secrets for decades, never seeking recognition. Now the spotlight had found her, and she wasn't sure if she welcomed it or feared what it might awaken. The colonel lowered his salute and stepped closer, his voice softer now, meant for her and Alex alone. "Ma'am, there are generals who will want to meet you. They'll want to hear every detail, but for now, please let us honor you." He gestured toward the flight line. "Would you do us the honor of watching a formation dedicated in your name?" Hesitated, she didn't like ceremonies, but Alex squeezed her hand, his eyes pleading. "Please, Grandma, this is your moment." She nodded slowly. "All right, but only if they fly safely." The colonel smiled, and for the first time, the pilots allowed themselves a laugh. As the crowd roared with renewed excitement, the F-22s taxied back into position, engines screaming to life. The announcer, finally regaining his voice, declared with booming pride, "Ladies, and today's formation is no longer just for show. This one is for Mrs. Hale, the ghost instructor." And as the Raptors lifted off, slicing into the sky with impossible grace, watched silently, her past and present colliding in contrails of thunder and light. By the next morning, the quiet town near Edwards Air Force Base was anything but quiet. Satellite trucks lined the streets, reporters crowded the diner, and camera crews set up outside the gates. Overnight, the footage of the F-22 pilots saluting Hale had spread like wildfire. Headlines blazed across screens. "The ghost instructor, REVELED. Meet the woman behind America's pilots. Grandmother honored as secret hero of the sky." Clips of frail, steady, unshaken were replayed on every network. Commentators marveled at how she had been forgotten, how her voice had shaped survival training for decades. Social media erupted with hashtags, "Ghost Instructor," "Hail Salute," and more simply, "Thank you." In their small kitchen, Alex scrolled through endless posts on his tablet, his jaw dropping at the sheer scale of it. "Grandma, you're everywhere. Look, they've got pilots from Japan, Britain, even Australia posting about you. Some are saying your lessons influenced their training too." Sipped her tea slowly, her expression unreadable. "The world has a way of exaggerating, Alex. Don't believe every headline." But even as she dismissed it, the knock on the door came. A uniformed aide stood outside, flanked by two security personnel. Behind them, a black sedan with tinted windows waited patiently. "Mrs. Hale," the aide said politely, "the Air Force Chief of Staff requests your presence at headquarters. There are matters they wish to clarify." Alex's eyes went wide. "Chief of Staff, that's like the top of the top." Sighed, she had expected this. "Very well, but I'm not leaving without my grandson." The aide hesitated, then nodded. "Both of you, ma'am." Hours later, they sat in a sleek conference room in Washington. D.C. generals lined one side of the table, their uniforms heavy with medals. Across from them sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. Alex sat beside her, fidgeting nervously. The Chief of Staff leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale, first let me say, you've earned the respect of every man and woman in uniform. What you did in the 1960s, it saved lives we can't even count. But I need to ask, why didn't we know about you? Why were your contributions erased from the record?" Tilted her head slightly, her voice calm as ever. Because back then, the Air Force wasn't ready to admit a civilian woman had saved its most ambitious program. The politics were complicated, the pride was delicate, and so they buried the truth. A murmur rippled through the room. Alex clenched his fists. "That's not fair, they stole your recognition." Touched his hand gently. "Recognition doesn't land a crippled jet, Alex. Survival does. I didn't need medals. I needed those pilots to live." The chief of staff's jaw tightened. "Be that as it may, the truth is out now, and the public won't rest until we make it right." One of the generals cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with your permission, we'd like to declassify portions of the Edwards files. We want the world to see what you did." Closed her eyes for a moment as if listening to ghosts only she could hear. Finally, she nodded. "Do what you must, but don't make me into something I'm not. I wasn't a warrior, I was a teacher. Don't rewrite me into legend just because it sells well." Her humility struck them harder than any protest could. That evening, news networks aired newly released footage, grainy black and white reels of the 1967 simulations, transcripts of calm voice guiding panicked pilots back to control. The world watched, spellbound, as the myth became fact. But as the applause swelled and the nation cheered, Alex noticed something his grandmother never said on television. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she finally whispered to him, "I paid a price, Alex. I carried the memories of every failure, every pilot we lost before the breakthrough. Those faces never left me. That's why I never told anyone, because with every life saved came the ones I couldn't." Alex swallowed hard, his admiration deepening into something heavier, understanding. The world saw a hero, but he saw his grandmother, the woman who had borne the weight of silence for a lifetime. And now that silence was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of ceremonies, interviews, and speeches. Hale's quiet life of obscurity had been swept into the tidal wave of national recognition. Invitations poured in, from universities, museums, and military academies. Letters arrived from pilots she had unknowingly saved, some written in shaky handwriting from veterans long retired, others typed on official letterhead from active squadrons still flying with her lessons etched into their training. Accepted each with grace but never with pride. She often reminded Alex, "Fame fades. What matters is what we leave behind." The Air Force arranged the most significant honor of all, a permanent exhibit at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. At the unveiling, stood before a glass case containing the original simulation notes she had scribbled in 1967, alongside the headset through which her voice had guided desperate pilots. A plaque read, "Hail the Ghost Instructor. Her calm guidance saved countless lives. Though unrecognized in her time, her legacy endures in every pilot who takes the sky." Alex watched as visitors crowded the exhibit. Some saluted. Others placed small flags or handwritten notes beneath the display. He saw children pointing at her photo, their eyes wide with admiration. For the first time, the weight of her silence seemed to lift from her shoulders. But never one for pomp, preferred the quieter tributes. One afternoon, an Air Force Academy cadet approached her shyly. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, when I'm in the cockpit and things get rough, I'll remember what you taught us. Breathe, decide, execute. It's like you're there with us." Smiled gently, "Then I've done my job." As her story spread, it became more than history. It became a lesson. Schools spoke of her during Women's History Month. Aviation programs cited her contributions as proof that brilliance comes from every corner, not just from those in uniform. Her name, once whispered only in simulators, became part of textbooks. Yet through it all, remained grounded in the one thing she valued most, her family. One evening, she and Alex sat on the porch, watching contrails crisscross the sunset sky. The distant roar of jets echoed faintly, and Alex turned to her with a question that had been burning in his heart. "Grandma, do you ever wish you spoken up sooner, that you'd told the world?" Thought for a long moment. "No," she said softly. "The work mattered, not the recognition, but I do wish I'd told you earlier, because stories, Alex, they aren't just for the history books, they're for family, for the people who carry us forward." Alex nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "I'll carry it, Grandma. I'll make sure no one forgets again." Her hand squeezed his. "That's all I could ask." Not long after, the Air Force invited to attend one final. This time, she wasn't an anonymous raffle winner. She was the guest of honor. As the F-22s thundered into the sky, flying in perfect diamond formation, the announcer's voice rang out over the speakers. "This is the Hale formation, dedicated to Hale, the ghost instructor." The jets broke apart in a stunning maneuver, leaving trails that crossed into the shape of an open book across the sky. It was symbolic, the announcer explained. Her story, once closed and hidden, had now been opened for the world to read. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Alex looked up through tears. Beside him, his grandmother's eyes shimmered with something rare: peace. For the rest of her life, continued to live simply, never letting fame alter who she was. But when she passed quietly some years later, the world remembered. Her funeral was attended by pilots from across the globe, their jets roaring overhead in a missing man formation. Alex stood tall among them, clutching her old clipboard, now preserved in the museum. And whenever he told her story, he always ended with the same words she had spoken to him. Ordinary people can still do extraordinary things. Sometimes, the world just forgets to tell the story. Now, thanks to him, thanks to those who finally listened, the world never forgot Hale again. Her name was written in the sky.